Welcome to Author Voices On Air, and I'm your host, Rick Bell. Our next book is Leeds, Money and Misery Me. For die-hard followers of Leeds United Football Club, the last 20 years have brought far too few reasons to be cheerful, and far more prominent are the depressing lows. Doing a Leeds, as it's known, is a lazy strapline that is trotted out whenever the club overreaches itself financially and comes a cropper with those financials heading south. The lot of United fan is not a happy one, but still they come and support their team week in, week out. And one such diehard fan is my next guest, the author of this wonderful book, Dave Tomlinson. Welcome, Dave, and thank you for joining me on the show. It is a pleasure to be talking to you.
Thank you, Rick.
Now, firstly, for the benefit of our listeners in the US of A and Canada, I should mention that this book is about the sport of soccer here in the UK, and one particular club or team known as Leeds United. And
that's right.
And this book follows the passion, the love, the worship, if I could use that term, of the author and, the love of Leeds United. Now, let's first of all talk about that aspect of it. And tell me, what is it about football or soccer and about Leeds United that fuels your passion?
Okay, well, it's interesting because I remember going back to 1970s when I first got, I suppose, interested in Leeds, and it was about then. It was very much in England. Football's a really strange thing because it is really about clubs and people identifying with clubs. So the problem for a Leeds fan is he can't support anybody else. So if the club went out of business, as it did a while ago, they've got nowhere else to go. So you get this real passionate involvement as a community with your local club. And certainly at that time, Leeds were a really big side in both Europe and the UK. And they went through a really bad season. So when I first started watching them, they were up for three major honours. So there was the European Cup, the Champions Cup, the League at home, and the FA Cup. So they were all placed to win all three of those, but it all fell apart. And I suppose that is what happens to a lot of Leeds fans. They get this. They're building themselves up to get really involved. So all this triumph, and then it falls flat in their faces. But people stay with it despite that. So you get this real identification with Leeds. And I think I'm right in saying that no other club's quite like that in England. You get a lot of people that follow the big clubs, but it takes a special breed of fan to stay through a club like Leeds through thick and thin, and that's what's happened. So we've had some dire times, and we've gone out of business a couple of times. And it gets this real identification. I said before, when you Leeds, it really gets you. You can't change it. It happens to you.
Really, that is what being a true fan is all about, or a true supporter of anything, really, is that it's not all about the highs. It's about sticking with them through the good and the bad. Now, your passion for this particular soccer or football club, I mean, and it is a passion. So how did that become the book? What inspired you to write about it?
Okay. Well, for about 10 years, I've run a fanzine called mightyleeds.co.uk, which is a history of the club. So I've been doing this for a while. Then about 2014-15, a publishing company approached me to do a history of the club. So I've had a couple of books out before, but they were quite thin documents. So it's very tight in the publishing world. It's often they don't give you enough to do full justice to it. And I badly wanted to do something that went into a lot more detail. So I went down the self-publishing route because I wanted to explore what's happened in the last 25 years from two aspects. How the fans have really stayed with the club through some real dire times, and they've really had a bad time both on the field and financially. And then the other side of it is, as money's come into football, and there's really big money in the UK and in Europe, what's happened there is people have come in, bought the club, and then done a disservice to that same set of fans. So you've got an abuse of trust, financial, not misdealings, but mismanagement. So people have promised to take us somewhere, They're promised big cash, and then for a number of reasons, it's fallen flat. So what this book's about is trying to explore those two things. So while it's been that dire, you've had some of the most passionate fans in the country, if not Europe, and they've stuck with this club. And you often hear this. They take more fans to away sides than many Premier League sides, never mind second division sides, and that's where Leeds are. They're in the second tier in the English Football League. So effectively, you get this really passionate following going through, and this book tries to explore the two parts, the highs and lows of being a fan, and then the dire consequences of what happened money-wise. And this was a club that was very profitable when it was in the Champions League. It was making tens of millions of both turnover and profit. And then it got into, one year, it made a £50 million loss. And that was a record at the time in football. The club nearly went out of business 2 or 3 times.
Kind of about the financial side of it, what do you think is the biggest contributory factor to the financial foes of football clubs in general? And do you think it's that the players are being paid more than their talent deserves, or do you think there's more to it than that?
I think there's more to that, but if I just talk about the players, I think part of it is when money came into the game, it got this vicious circle. You had to pay more to get the best players so you could compete. And what's happened is you've got the very rich in the Premier League right at the top of the English game, and then the next tier down where Leeds are, that's called the Championship. And in that league, the rewards, if people get promoted into the Premier League, is so much more significantly. So they have this thing at the end of the season called playoffs. And the club that wins that and goes into the top league, they reckon it's worth about 30 million quid to them. So in terms of TV money, and Premier League placings, it makes that much of a difference. Now, what happens is, in that league, because people are chasing that, in some cases, they pay the players more than they actually earn in income. So clearly, you can't do that for very long. And a lot of clubs have really run foul of that. And they've introduced a number of things in Europe around, it's called financial fair play, where the amount of losses they can make is limited. Now, that's quite a long answer to say players is part of it, but it's also about the people that buy the clubs in the interests of really trying to get to the top and getting really lucrative returns, but getting there is a real gamble. At the same time, when you get into that type of market, generally speaking, there's people with big egos. So they don't tend to listen to, as you normally get in the corporate world, you get an entire board. In many cases, the people that buy on these clubs, they've got no, balancing argument. So when you look at corporate governance and things like that, and I'm a director in the NHS, National Health Service in England, so I understand this, but what you get in football, it becomes one person and there's no alternative view. So they go chasing. There isn't somebody that cautions against or gives them a different view. So people headlong dash for the mighty dollar, and often they fall really badly. And I know that's what happened to Leeds. So they went from being one of the most profitable clubs in the country to they very nearly went out of business. They took the view that they bought all these players on the transfer market and they'd be able to sell them for the same, but it was like in the housing market, the bottom fell out of the market, so they couldn't recover. They were trying to sell players in a buyer's market, and you just couldn't get the prices that they paid. So it became, a vicious circle. And as I said, they nearly went out of business. So it's really complicated.
Now let's talk about who you see as the readership for this book. I mean, obviously, it's going to be a book that will appeal to fans of this particular club. Yeah. But that aside, who else do you see as your audience, if I can use that term, for this book?
Okay. Well, certainly, as you said, it's going to be local supporters, but Leeds is a really well-supported club right across Europe and indeed the world. So you've got people elsewhere outside of the country who are football fans of Leeds are interested, other people in different parts of the country. So you've got quite a widespread support. But it's also about, for the general football fan, because what's happened to Leeds has happened at a lesser degree, but to all sorts of clubs. And he's trying to identify the lessons that have caused that and what can be done to avoid it. So part of the book is about the mistakes that were made and what would happen if it was slightly different. So you've got the football supporting public, but you've also got, this is a case study in business failure. So it's a club that really pushed the boat out like a company. It pushed its boat out chasing the market and it fell foul. So Leeds is, if you like, the archetypal story of a rise and fall situation. And that's happened to many companies. And it's interesting because a lot of the people who are directors of the club, they've been public limited company directors in the UK. So they're some of the biggest companies in certainly the UK, if not Europe. And they understand how this works, but for some reason, they missed it at this club.
So do you think it's possibly a big part of it is when it comes to business, their hearts are ruling their business sense?
Yes, but it's slightly more complicated. So it is, but they're going on the route of they gamble because the prize for winning that gamble is significant. So, for instance, the amount of money you get between these two tiers in English football, it's tens of millions different. So if a club gets promotion, even if they've made losses for the previous 3 years, they more than make that up in the first year. So they get literally tens of millions for being in this top league. And they don't have to necessarily be successful. For every level they go up at, they get an extra £500,000 between the different placings at the end of the season. But where the money really comes from is the television coverage. So in some cases, you've got some of the people that led the club, they have led their hearts through all their heads. And there is one guy that led this through in the late 90s, early part of the millennium, Peter Ridsdale, and he often talks about living the dream. They pushed the boat out, spent loads of money on terms of players to get in Champions League, because that's where the action was at. But then they couldn't sell through. So he was a guy that supported the club at that stage for 40 years. He was at a cup final with them in 1965. So he's the typical fan in the boardroom. But I think he got caught up with this, and he became both chairman and chief exec. So he'd got almost unfettered power. And it's like you talk about what you do if you manage the club, but it's really difficult to both push for success but then take a sound business approach. And it's difficult to make money in football in England unless you're right at the top. If you are right at the top, you make a fortune. But there were a couple of people that passionately loved the club. They did the right thing, but they didn't stick at it long enough. Fans turned against them. They didn't get the results. So it quickly became a financial gamble that blew up in their faces.
You have a lot of knowledge about the game and about the club. And as you mentioned briefly earlier on, you've written some other books on the topic. But when it came to writing this book, tell us about some of the hurdles and some of the challenges that you had to overcome. And on the flip side of that, for you, when this book was published, it was printed, published, you had the hard copy in your hand.
Yeah.
What was the big reward for you? So that's a double-sided question there.
Okay, so for me, I said the previous ones were just, use the term normal publishing. So a published company approached it, they funded all that, and then I get a royalty on the sales of that. And, I did that because I like doing it. So you're never going to make a fortune unless you're someone like J.K. Rowling. You're never going to make a fortune over being an author. And for me, as I think I said before, the first couple of books, they're quite thin, so they're limited by the amount of content you can include. Now, when you go down the route of self-publishing, which is what I've done with this, really it's down to the author. You can spend as much as you want, but the price goes up. And what I've seen around this, the self-publishing, it's really good because I'm allowed to vent and really own what I want, but you don't get the edit. What they do is basically we charge you on a fee for the service they provide, market service. A lot of those are really valid. But then because of the depth of this book, and it is about 600 pages, the selling price of that is really high. So when it competes in the market, you can get a lot of books about football and other things really cheap on the internet. That's really opened things out. So for me, it was really how to fund this, whether I'm seeking to get a return, how to make it different and distinctive enough in its readership to really hit home. So I haven't said before, but this club has just gone through its centenary. So there was a lot of books out at this stage. But for me, the real big challenge was I'd got all the content. I got literally thousands of pages here, and it was editing down to be something that's concise enough, but really captures the story. When we finally got it out, I spoke to a guy up there that would be interested in publishing later and would maybe talk about that later. But he said, you've probably got 2 books worth here. You could have probably slimmed it down and you'd be able to sell this in a very different way. Document book that's useful for people, but it's incredibly good to really pick this book up at the end of it and say, I did this. This is all my work, and good, bad, or indifferent. I'm proud of this.
You mentioned that someone had mentioned that really there's 2 books here, and that brings me conveniently to our next question. I believe that our listeners and new readers will be soon able to look forward to a new book. Tell us of that.
Well, I desperately, and I've talked to a couple of people, and I said this guy I spoke to before, he's got his own publishing company, and we're having some discussion in the near future about where there's a next project, but I've got the next one waiting to come out. So I've got a book about the same club that goes back 50 years to when they first emerged as a major club. Now, for me, I've got to work out, do I go down the self-publishing route the same? Do I work with people that can help me with that? And how do I make it a unique, again, document? Because this talks about the club in the 1960s, but there's been bags of books about that. And I've got to try and work out how to get something that really appeals and is different to the norm. And I'm just working through that in a minute. So it tells the story of this club rising from, I suppose, obscurity in the early 1960s in a northern city in England. And it became a major club in Europe. So it's a real rags to riches story. And again, through that club had a lot of really bad publicity, and people hated the club. They were called Dirty Leeds at the time, and that still lives with them today. And that was a real unique period in English football history. So the 1960s, when England won the World Cup, it was a game that was going through enormous changes. And again, there was new money coming in, players were starting to get paid more. So it went through a bit of a revolution, the same as the last 25 years. So the next one tells a different story about a different period, but you've still, again, got this unique blend of both money in the business, but also how the fans of this club really love them, stick with thick and thin. And as much as anything, they're the story of these books. Yeah.
Now, we've talked about a lot during the interview. We've talked about the club. We've talked about your passion for the club, your passion for the football. And what is clear is your passion for this book and the new book you're working for, which is wonderful. But is there anything that we haven't covered during the interview, such as your YouTube channel, etc., that you would like to share with our listeners?
That'd be very kind. So if I just said, in terms of YouTube, it's not a very big channel at the minute, but if people go onto the internet and search in YouTube and they put in the search term YouTube and then the name of the book, Leeds, Money and Misery Me, that'll take you to the channel that's got a couple of videos on, and there will be others there. There's also a couple of websites. So the one I talked about before, the one that tells the story of the club, that's mightyleeds.co.uk. There's also another website that's dedicated to the book itself, and that's mightyleeds.com. Then there's other things in terms of Facebook pages and Twitter handles, etc. But if people go onto there and just search for Leeds, Money and Misery Me on any of those channels, it will come up.
Well, thank you for that. Leeds, Money and Misery Me is published by Author House and is available direct from the publisher at authorhouse.com/bookstore and all good book stockists. Well, thank you for sharing with us and with our listeners and new readers your passion for the beautiful game, for Leeds United, and of course, most of all, for this book. Thank you, Dave.
Thanks very much, Rick. Thank you.
This is Rick Bell for Toginet Radio 2.0. Thank you for listening.